Tenma is a brilliant neurosurgeon. He has successfully completed countless difficult operations, yet he has always remained unknown. All of his achievements were taken by hospital director Udo. Tenma never dared to voice any resentment. After all, as a Japanese doctor, it was extremely difficult for him to gain a foothold in the German medical world. It was Director Udo who pushed aside all opposition and promoted him to head of surgery. Udo gave him the opportunity to display his talent, and in exchange, every achievement Tenma made was credited to Udo instead. To keep Tenma obedient, Udo even took the initiative to introduce his daughter Eva to him. Faced with this arrangement, Tenma could only silently accept everything. Even his colleagues knew it well. To them, Tenma was nothing more than the director's loyal dog. Just yesterday, Tenma followed Udo's orders. He performed surgery on a famous musician first, which resulted in the unfortunate death of a Turkish laborer. But early the next morning, the worker's wife blocked Tenma on his usual path to work. She questioned him in a hoarse, desperate voice, asking why he hadn't operated on her husband first. After all, her husband had arrived at the hospital before anyone else. Faced with the woman's grief-stricken accusations, Tenma was overwhelmed with guilt, because he knew perfectly well, if he had operated on her husband, the man would have survived. But in Udo's eyes, only profit mattered. So just moments before Tenma was about to operate on the worker, Udo transferred him away to perform surgery on the musician instead. Shame and regret relentlessly tormented Tenma's heart. Even that evening, while on a date with his girlfriend, the woman's desperate cries continued to echo in his mind. He made countless excuses for himself, such as the fact that the musician's life mattered too, or that he was simply following the director's orders. Yet none of these excuses eased his guilt in the slightest. He tried to find a bit of comfort from his girlfriend, but Eva told him instead that human lives are unequal by nature. Eva's words left him stunned on the spot. Her indifference was like a sharp blade, cutting through every excuse Tenma had built for himself. He couldn't help but ask himself, are some lives truly worth more than others? Tenma couldn't find an answer, or perhaps he had already accepted this reality. But soon, he was forced to face a second choice. Late one night, the hospital received a young boy who had been shot in the head. The bullet was deeply lodged in the boy's brain. Removing it would be extremely difficult. The slightest mistake, and the surgery would fail, costing the boy his life. In the entire hospital, only Tenma was capable of performing such a high-risk surgery. Just as he finished preparing and was about to enter the operating room, a colleague rushed in to inform him the mayor had fallen into a coma due to a cerebral thrombosis. He had been airlifted to the hospital by helicopter. Director Udo ordered Tenma to immediately devote all efforts to saving the mayor. At that moment, Tenma was once again forced to choose between two lives, but this time, he did not want to abandon the boy. He explained to Udo how difficult the surgery was. If anyone else operated on the boy, the child would certainly die. But Udo impatiently cut him off and told him instead that the mayor had agreed to increase hospital funding next quarter. Faced with Udo's command, Tenma once again chose to compromise. He turned and prepared to operate on the mayor. But at that very moment, the Turkish woman's cries echoed endlessly in his mind. In an instant, Tenma remembered the oath he made when he first became a doctor. He was meant to be a pure physician. Every life deserved to be treated equally. The next second, Tenma pushed open the door to the boy's operating room without hesitation and immediately began the surgery. After several exhausting hours, the boy was finally out of danger. Once everything was over, Tenma hurried to ask about the mayor's condition, but instead of an answer, he was met with ridicule and accusations from his colleagues. The mayor had already died on the operating table. Faced with everyone's blame, Tenma was at a complete loss. All he could do was anxiously wait for the director's punishment. Fortunately, the mayor's death did not bring negative consequences to the hospital. At the press conference, the director did everything he could to cover it up. He claimed the hospital had done its utmost, and that the mayor had been brought in too late. That was why the tragedy occurred. The incident quickly died down. The hospital even held a celebration because of it. Tenma approached Udo to apologize for his actions. Unexpectedly, Udo showed no intention of blaming him at all. Instead, he encouraged Tenma to continue following his own convictions. The weight that had been hanging over Tenma's heart finally lifted. Just then, the host invited the head of neurosurgery to come on stage and speak. Tenma stepped forward, but Udo stopped him directly. At that moment, Tenma finally understood. From the instant he disobeyed Udo's orders, his position as head of neurosurgery had already been given to Bonaparte. What Udo needed was an obedient dog, not a man who thought for himself. Not only that, Udo calmly told Tenma that as long as he remained in Germany, no hospital would ever take him in, none of his research papers would ever be published, no matter how talented or capable he was. It would all be meaningless. Tenma left the venue in a daze. He had no idea what he should do next. At that moment, his fiancée Eva appeared. Tenma hoped she would help him plead with the director, but Eva ignored him completely. She simply took off their engagement ring and threw it onto the floor. Then she walked toward another man. At that instant, Tenma fell into complete despair. At that time, the only one he could pour his heart out to was the unconscious boy. In the director's eyes, he was nothing more than a dog, and his colleagues often mocked him with cold sarcasm. Tenma had believed that if he endured quietly for a few more years, he could eventually pursue the medical research he loved. But now, everything was ruined. In his rage, Tenma declared that everyone in this hospital was unfit to be a doctor. They all deserved to die. But at that moment, Dr. Tenma failed to notice something. The boy who was supposed to be unconscious slowly opened his eyes. He had heard everything. Then the very next day, the police showed up at Tenma's doorstep. Only then did he learn that the director and two colleagues who often mocked him had all died under mysterious circumstances. After the police began investigating, they discovered something alarming. All three victims were found with identical candy wrappers nearby. Their causes of death were also the same. They had been poisoned with nitrate-based chemicals. This was clearly a premeditated murder. The killer's ability to lace candy with nitrate compounds suggested that the killer likely had access to hazardous drugs. Based on the social connections of the three victims, the police determined that Tenma was the only person who had conflicts with all of them. After their deaths, he also stood to benefit the most. Just as the police were preparing to dig deeper, something even stranger happened. The boy Tenma had saved, Johan, and his twin sister Anna, suddenly disappeared. It was as if they had never existed at all, with two major incidents occurring back to back. The only link between them was Tenma himself. The officer in charge of the case, Inspector Lunge, grew deeply suspicious of Tenma. He repeatedly questioned him about his recent movements, yet he found not a single flaw. Unwilling to give up, Lunge continued investigating from other angles. Meanwhile, Tenma had already decided to leave Germany. The string of recent events had left him completely disheartened. He wanted to return to Japan and focus solely on medical research. But before he could formally submit his resignation, the hospital board made an announcement. Tenma was promoted to chief of surgery. At last, he was able to fully showcase his talent. Yet Tenma only felt the cruel irony of fate. Back when he desperately tried to climb higher, he was dismissed with a single word from the director. Now that he was ready to walk away, his career suddenly turned around. What made it even more bitter was that his former fiancée, upon hearing of his promotion, acted as if nothing had ever happened and wanted to reconcile with him. But to Tenma, the Eva standing before him now filled him with nothing but disgust. He turned around and walked away. From that point on, Tenma devoted all of his energy to medical research. In the blink of an eye, 9 years passed. Tenma's career flourished. During that same period, a series of brutal murder cases shocked the nation. Within 2 years, 4 couples were murdered one after another. The officer in charge of the investigation was none other than Inspector Lunge. After careful investigation, he identified one of the suspects, a man named Adolf. This man had been arrested twice for theft, and his lock-picking skills were highly proficient. Lunge concluded that Adolf likely had 1 or 2 accomplices, but just as the police began investigating Adolf, he was involved in a car accident late one night. He was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, and by coincidence, the attending physician was Tenma. The moment Lunge saw Tenma, the unsolved case from 9 years ago resurfaced in his mind. Back then, Tenma had been the prime suspect, but due to a lack of direct evidence, they were unable to convict him. Looking at Tenma, who had risen through the ranks after the director's death, Lunge slowly spoke. In murder cases, the first person to suspect is always the one who benefits the most. In that old case, Tenma had been the most direct beneficiary, but Tenma paid no attention to Lunge's hostility. He closed the door and focused entirely on preparing for surgery. Under his treatment, Adolf eventually escaped immediate danger. However, his mental state appeared unstable. He kept muttering the same phrase over and over again, "The monster is coming." A few days later, Tenma pushed Adolf outside in a wheelchair to let him get some sunlight. This gesture made Adolf deeply grateful, so he began to talk about his past. Adolf was born into a poor family. One day, while passing by a shop, he saw a uniquely designed timepiece. The young Adolf was immediately drawn to it, but he simply couldn't afford it, so he pried open the lock of the watch shop, hoping to steal the timepiece, but he was caught on the spot. From that failed theft onward, he was branded with the label of thief. Unable to find any other work, Adolf could only survive by stealing. He was even sent to prison several times because of it. Only now did Adolf finally realize that at the beginning, he had simply wanted that timepiece. But once certain paths are taken, there is no easy way back. Adolf sank deeper and deeper. In the end, he became entangled in a serial murder case. He nearly lost his life as well. Tenma urged him to confess. He told him to report everything he knew to the police. That way, his life could still start over someday. Suddenly, Adolf's face filled with terror. He knew it well. The man behind the scenes who had hired him was someone truly ruthless. If Adolf betrayed him, he would surely be killed. Yet even late into the night, Tenma's words continued to echo in Adolf's mind. In the end, he made up his mind and went to find the police officer guarding him. He said he was willing to tell everything he knew, but for some reason, the officer outside the door never responded. Only then did Adolf realize that the officer had already been murdered. At the same time, Tenma was walking down the street when he happened to glimpse a timepiece displayed in a shop window. The timepiece looked exactly like the one Adolf had described. Tenma immediately entered the shop and bought it. He planned to give it to Adolf, but when he returned to the hospital, he discovered that the on-duty police officer had collapsed on the ground. Beside him, there lay a candy wrapper, and Adolf was nowhere to be found from his hospital bed. Tenma rushed down the stairs after him. All he could see was Adolf's fleeing silhouette. Without hesitation, Tenma chased after him. Everything that happened today was exactly the same as the tragedy 9 years ago. The victims died on the spot after eating poison candy, and his patient had disappeared without a trace. Because of that incident back then, Tenma had been under suspicion for a long time. This time, he was determined to find the real killer and to save his patient. Following Adolf's trail, he arrived at an abandoned building. Calling out Adolf's name, he searched floor by floor. Finally, he heard Adolf's voice. Adolf urged him to leave immediately. At that moment, Tenma realized that the true killer was here. He followed the sound. Soon, he saw Adolf kneeling on the ground, and standing before him was a mysterious figure completely swallowed by the darkness. The man calmly stated that his name was Johan, and that he was the boy Tenma had saved 9 years ago. Tenma immediately remembered him, the boy who had left such a deep impression. Back then, the boy had been shot in the head. His injuries were extremely severe. It was only through Tenma's relentless efforts that he had survived. Tenma asked him why he was here and what he intended to do to Adolf. Johan pulled out a handgun and said he was about to carry out an execution. Terrified, Adolf told Tenma the truth. Johan had hired him and his 2 accomplices to murder 4 couples one after another, but in the end, Johan killed those 2 accomplices himself. Only Adolf had narrowly escaped. Adolf said that Johan was a bloodthirsty monster. Tenma knew that Johan had fled from East Germany. He was the child of a high-ranking official couple. Now that his identity had been exposed, he would surely become a wanted man. Tenma urged him to stop killing, but Johan merely let out a soft laugh. He said that Johan was not his original name. No one knew his true origins. Johan calmly said that after the hospital director and those 2 doctors died, Tenma had gained the position he held today. He was happy for Tenma's current success. Suddenly, Tenma remembered the words he had spoken 9 years ago, that he wished they would all die, but those were only words spoken in anger. He had never truly wanted to harm anyone, nor had he ever imagined that Johan would go on to kill people. But Johan said instead that he was someone who should have died. If it hadn't been for Tenma's persistence back then, he would not be alive today. So he wanted to repay Tenma. Johan shot and killed Adolf with a single bullet. Then he told Tenma that if Tenma had not saved him back then, none of this would have ever happened.